this deployment. How I started this deployment a naive but self-respecting man, and now I don't even recognize the man I've become. The bar scene fades out, and we cut to 2 years later, when I'm living the life I want to live, and Fredericks is standing next to me as we buy a house, shop for groceries, pick out wine, choose a wooden crib. But then reality grabs my shirt and shakes me violently. I look over at Fredericks. I open my mouth, but I don't say a word. I can't. Men just don't do that in bars on military bases. I remain silent, while in the background a woman compares love to a battlefield. I'm not strong, even though the Pat Benatar wannabe makes me feel otherwise. What I realized that night in the bar was that it wasn't Fredericks I was longing after. I didn't really imagine a future with Fredericks, although at the time I like to think I did. Fredericks was simply a stand-in for Jeremy. And ever since we got deployed, I wondered what went wrong between us. So in March, I decide to send him an email. I sit down at the computer. I start to describe to the man I'm with our nights of drinking in Colorado Springs and the days we've spent preparing at Fort Carson. But before long, the email turns from simple descriptions of events and people into heartfelt feelings. I admit it to someone else. I'm scared. I try to explain all the feelings I've had over the last 2 months, how I've been thinking about him ever since I left North Dakota, and how I've wished for someone to confide in. Mostly I ramble on about our relationship and how we never had closure. My relationship with him was my first and only real relationship with another man. And after a year, we simply decided to call it quits. He moved on to graduate school in southern Minnesota, and I wasn't ready to move with him. But for the last 3 years, I've been thinking about what would have happened between us. Then, at the end of the email, I typed 3 words that surprised me. I love you. I want him to know that even though I didn't say it much during our relationship, I did love him. And if I didn't return from the deployment, I wanted him to know that. I stare at the computer screen for a few minutes and wonder if I really mean it. Do I love him, or just the memory of him? I love you. It's typed out right there in Times New Roman, so it must be true. I check my email several times over the next couple of weeks, hoping that I'll get an email back from him, something along the lines of, I love you too, or simply, I used to love you, but nothing ever arrives. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of both of us, I guess if anybody has any comments or questions or anything you'd like to hear more about.
So did you ever hear back from him?
Not before the war, and not during the war. No, we're in touch now. We're in touch now over Facebook and email. So, yeah.
Where'd you learn to write? Not like a carpenter. That's good.
Through school. I mean, there's a lot of my people I went to school with, graduate school with, are here as well tonight, and Dick, one of my professors, is here as well, who sort of helped me work on some of this material. So it's really a lot of those people helped me. Because I came back from the war with this story, and I was like, I know I have this story now. How do I tell it? And I didn't really know how to tell it, and so Dick and others and other people who read my work helped out with that. Yeah, it's great.
Were you ever able to come out to anybody while you were deployed?
No. I was
Friendships at all?
too scared of what would happen if because at the time I was supposed to get out of the military when I was in Iraq, but they wouldn't let me get out because my enlistment was up because we were in a war, and so if you're in the National Guard or the reserves, you can't get out. And so I was afraid that they would just sort of shrug it off, and I'd have to complete the whole deployment, and then everyone would know. And I didn't feel it was a good time to sort of do that, especially during the war when we're all walking around with guns. You know, we have other things to worry about. So not that I ever thought anything like that would happen.
So we hear stories that suggest there are a lot of men who are pretty open, at least everybody knows they're gay and intolerant. Do you see that, do you experience it like that?
Yeah, I think my own experience, everyone probably knew, but couldn't talk about it or couldn't ask me about it. And so I think there are a lot of people in the military who are gay and want to be open about it. There are some that are open and have had good experiences and bad. And so it's great that we're in a time now this year when don't ask, don't tell is being repealed, and so it's great that we'll finally hopefully be able to see that. No, please.
I'm just wondering how you came across the original source material and what made you want to bring the book back out and
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah, the question is with Gay Bar, how I came across the original source material and decided to do something with it, create a revival edition of it. And I do want to take a moment here to acknowledge Helen Bronson, my co-author. It's not an age progression photo. This is not. The way it came about was my playwright friend, Dean Gray, who had done a play based on my first book, Farm Boys, which had a production in St. Paul in 2006 at the Great American History Theater. He and I got together while that production run was going on, and we were having a meal together in St. Paul. And he was telling me about a new play that he was working on about an uncle of his Uncle Irvin, who had grown up in the 30s and 40s in Iowa, a farm in Iowa, and was gay, had moved to Los Angeles in the 1950s pursuing a music career, and had committed suicide in Los Angeles in the early 60s. And so Dean never knew this uncle, but knew of him, and was working on a play about his life, and asked me if I knew of any source material that might give him a good window into what life for homosexual men in the 1950s in Los Angeles might have been like. And at that time, the wonderful book Gay LA had not yet been published, or I would have mentioned that. But I had just maybe a few months before happened to see a listing in an online used book, sort of vintage gay studies material listing, a listing for a book called Gay Bar, and it had a brief description, and it was clearly a little nonfiction memoir kind of book written by a woman in Los Angeles about running a bar and so on. And so I thought, well, maybe this would be a useful piece of background information. And I said, there's Quatrefoil Library here in St. Paul. We should just see if they're open today, and by some remote possibility, they might have a copy of the book. And so we went over there, and they were open, and we just about fell over when we saw that they had a copy of this obscure little book published, by a small press in California 50 years earlier. So, and they let us borrow it, so we took it. So that's how it got going. Well, it, I think, served as useful background for Dean in that play. And then we started talking about the possibility of a stage production inspired by Gay Bar. It seemed to have great potential. And so I am not a playwright. I have no desire to compromise the quality of a script by meddling and trying to create the script. But I told Dean that I would work on research, just trying to learn more about this bar, the woman who ran it, who wrote this book. And I talked early on in Gay Bar about that whole process of trying to learn more about it. And I was very fortunate to connect with One Archives in Los Angeles. They had some great materials from the publisher about the whole creation of the book, correspondence, contract. In fact, it was that allowed me to identify where the bar had been located, because that's not specified in the book. And then, through the wonders of internet genealogical databases and all that sort of stuff, I was able to find Helen Branson's 90-year-old daughter and 60-year-old grandson living in California. And they I was trying to find someone who was a descendant of Helen P. Ransom. And they were very wonderful informants and collaborators in this whole process of learning about her. So that's really how it came about. The Dean Gray and the playwright and woman that he's working with on it are making good progress. I don't really think that there's a date set for an initial production of the play, but they're moving along with it. So, yes.
Bronson, I just want to say it's a tremendous book, and it is wonderfully, wonderfully written, in my opinion. And quite apart from your writing it as a day man serving in Iraq, the story that you tell of serving in this particular rationale of a war is such. It's just such a wonderful thing you've done. I have two nephews in the military. They are my only nephews, and one returned a year ago from Iraq. And your story of being there that year it just so closely mirrors what I heard from him, only you gave the gift of telling so much more, and I appreciate it. I just want everyone to read it.
Great.
It's,
There you go. Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted it to mirror sort of the experience. I mean, it's a war in itself, and the last thing we have to worry about is whether or not someone's the man serving next to you is gay or not. I mean, it's I tried to make it a point where it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter, and so that was really my point that I was trying to make with the book, and so because it really I had the same experience, well not the same, but I had a similar experience as the other men. I mean, we still had to go through the same type of hell of war and stuff, and so I tried to do both in a way. But thank you very much.
And since you've been back, does your platoon know about the book and everything, and what's the reception?
It's sort of strange in the book at the the epilogue. I talk about how because of the experience, I sort of wanted just a clean break. I was ready to get out, and like I said, my enlistment came up when I was in Iraq, and so at the end of when we finally came home in March of 2004, I just got out. I turned in all my stuff and left, and so I didn't have contact with hardly anyone. Maybe one or two of the guys that I really became close with. And since that time, I've sort of reconnected with some of them through the wonders of Facebook. And so I talk about it on my Facebook page, and I talk about, that's all I've been talking about really for the last month or so, but and in line longer. So I'm sure they've probably heard of it, although I haven't heard back from any of the ones I'm in contact with what they think. So I'm anticipating it at some point here. Just came out beginning of the month. June 8th.
What was your feeling about the mission in Iraq after you got?
The mission itself, I really felt strongly about the mission. I think it's partially being brainwashed to believe that you have to believe in the mission, otherwise the structure of a military unit is going to fall apart. And so I really believed in the mission. But my thought changed as it went along, and as we were sort of strung along. We were told early on that we were only going to be there for it's going to be a short mission. It's like just like when we were over in Kuwait the first time for Desert Storm, it was a very short war. Got in, got out, and we're going to be home. And that's what we were told early on. And then it turned into 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, a whole year. And so I believed in it at first, but towards the end of that, I felt we did some good while we were there. I don't think we should have went there in the first place, but I think we did some good being there. And I could see that on the missions we did into Baghdad. We did a lot of repairing schools and hospitals and community building type things, which I really believed in.